nhắn thu về miền Nam lúa thu mừng Điện Biên cười nắng, lúa thu mừng Điện Biên cười nắng, nhắn thu về miền Nam lúa vui. Gió thu về nhẹ bay lúa thu vàng, nắng thu vàng tỏa thơm mùi lúa, nắng thu vàng tỏa thơm màu lúa. Gió thu về nhẹ bay lúa thu. Đêm hôm trước em ngủ em nằm mơ, mơ bay với pháo bông bay đêm hội, mơ bay với pháo bông bay đêm hội. Em trông thấy ở kia dưới chân núi sông miền Nam kia vẫn mong chờ Điện Biên mừng lúa, vẫn mong chờ Điện Biên mừng lúa. Núi sông miền Nam kia vẫn mong. Em mơ, em hát, em cười. Em mơ, em lặng nghe. Nhắn thu về miền Nam lúa thu mừng Điện Biên cười nắng, lúa thu mừng Điện Biên cười nắng, nhắn thu về miền Nam lúa vui.
Xe ta bon trên những dặm đường, giờ làng quê ta băng qua bao suối đeo đồi nương, mà xe ta bon ra chiến trường. Chào em cô gái lam hồng, giữa tiếng bom gao đàn réo vẫn nghe vang vang câu hò trên đường. Niềm vui lớn tỏa lan thân quê ta, đi thông đường để những chuyến xe ta băng băng qua. Hồng Linh ơi, đỉnh cao mây vươn đã cùng em từ những đêm thức tròn, nối tiếp những mạch đường quê nhà, đường rộn ràng những chuyến xe qua. Tình nghĩa quê em sáng tỏ như ánh trăng đêm rằm, tiền phương tay lái mang tình em đàm đang. Xe ta bon đi trên đường lòng vui như mơ hội, đường quê em êm đưa như thoi dê hết bao tâm tình. Lững lờ đèn giặc dõi lửa soi để em đi thông đường, kia gà rừng bằng gáy cuối nương. Vượt đèo ngang nào bạn ơi, tay lái ta dồn lên lời ca. Hỡi cô gái trên đất lam hồng, mỗi dặm xe qua lòng em càng thấu tỏ. Dù xe anh chạy đêm chạy ngày cùng chẳng bằng tình nghĩa em, vì miền Nam mà yêu thương đi thông đường để những chuyến xe qua. Hòa chung tay lái em đã góp công ngày đêm trên tuyến đường. Xe ta bon trên những dặm đường, giờ làng quê ta băng qua bao suối đeo đồi nương, mà xe ta bon ra chiến trường. Chào em cô gái lam hồng, giữa tiếng bom gao đàn réo vẫn nghe vang vang câu hò trên đường. Niềm vui lớn tỏa lan thân quê ta, đi thông đường để những chuyến xe ta băng băng qua. Hoành Sơn một mái suối về, hòa tình em từ những viên đá nhỏ. Đêm lát trên đường quê nhà, đường rộn ràng những chuyến xe qua. Tình nghĩa quê em sáng tỏ như ánh trăng đêm rằm, tiền phương tay lái mang tình em đàm đang. Xe ta bon đi trên đường, tiền phương đang vẫy gọi. Hồi quê hương bao thân yêu cho ta gửi lời tâm tình. Chào những người chẳng tiếc máu xương, ngày đêm đi thông đường là nhiễu điều phù lấy giá hương. Đây tình Nam với nghĩa Bắc, thương nhau ta nào có quản chi. Hỡi cô gái trên đất lam hồng, với bàn tay em rời non và lớp biển. Dù sẽ chạy đêm chạy ngày cũng chẳng bằng tình nghĩa em, bằng mình trong bao gian nan. Đi thông đường định chuyến xe qua, dọn nhanh tay lái vô tiếng hát ca chào quê anh Lam Hồng.
Hello everyone, in this recipe we are going to secure a simple Spring Boot app with Google as the authentication provider by using Spring Security OAuth2 login features. The OAuth2 login with Google enables users using their existing account at Google to log into our Spring Boot application. If you still cannot imagine what is it, let's get started and we'll show it real quick. Okay, as usual, our entry point is always startup spring.io. I'm going to use Riddle, but feel free to choose anything you're familiar with. Java, Spring Boot 3.3.5, we'll name it all Clan Demo. Java 21. For dependency, we're going to need web and all2 client. Okay, then generate, unzip and open it using your favorite IDE. Here I already opened it using my favorite IntelliJ. And what we're going to see is we have Spring Boot Starter all2 client and Spring Boot Starter Web. Okay, first of all, without doing anything, let's rename our application.properties to application.yaml. Here, application.properties, application.yaml. And then let's add our log level for security. Log levels. Okay, let's run it and take a look at the log. We'll see the secure by default of Spring Security, even though we're not doing anything. All our service endpoints are protected by Spring Security. So let's take a look at the log here. So we'll secure any request with filters. And here we're going to have like logout filters, username password authentication filters, default login page generating filters, default logout page generating filters, and at the end of the security filter chains, we're going to have the authorization filters. Okay, let's check that by set our service to call 8080, and you see it's automatically redirect us to the login page. So this login page is generating by the filtered here, default login page generating filters. Okay, it's time to use auto configuration of all2 client. Let's back to our documentation and copy the configuration there. Here. So call configuration, and we're going to have this one. This is the compact configuration that we're going to use in this recipe. Copy it, and we're going to paste it here. Okay, so we need to replace it here. Okay, so, and we're going to paste it here. Okay, so we need to provide client ID and client secret. I've already had a client ID and a client secret in advance. Let's use them first, and we will figure out how to get them later. Okay, client ID, and this is the client secret. Okay, now let's restart our application. And then let's take a look at our log file. So this time, we'll secure any request with filters. Now this time, we're going to have the attendance of OAuth2 authorization request redirect filters, OAuth2 login authentication filters, and the OAuth2 authorization code grant filters. And as usual, the authorization filters come at the end of the security filter chains. Okay, now let's back to application. Now let's try to set it local 8080. So our application redirects us to accounts google.com domain and requires us to log in using the Google account instead of our application username and password. So by entering the right credential in Google, and by continuing, Google will share your name, email address, language reference, and profile pictures with. So this is the name of the app. But yeah, we were going to configure later. Then let's say continue. We can now bypass our filters and access application. Here we receive 404 not found because we don't have any controllers and APIs available at the root path. Let's create hello controller to make our application completed without any error. Okay, for example, I'm going to create a hello controller. And here we're going to have a hello controller is a REST controller, and we're going to have an authentication recipe here, or IDC user. And for the get mapping, we're going to print the hello and the email. So hello with the full names and email. So one thing about the OIDC user here, because we know Google support OpenID Connect, and by default Spring sending scopes include OpenID. So that's why we can use OpenID user here. And let's restart our application and see the result. Okay, then let's try to access it again. Now you're going to see some hello, my name, and the email from the ID token. Okay, now I hope you get what OAuth 2 login means. Users will use their old account at Google to log into our application. And from an application point of view, we can get the user info from Google after they successfully authenticated themselves. With that user info, our application allows users to access it. Of course, we have to consider scopes, roles, and privileges. But let's keep it short this time. Okay, let's move on to the last but not least step. Generating client ID and client secret at Google. So let's follow the documentation here. Go to the Google API. Dashboard. So we'll go to the Google API console. Even it's named console, but it's a website here, right? So don't let Google confuse you. So if you don't have a Google Cloud account, let's create a new one. You can also refer to my first video in the Google Cloud Run series. And if you don't have the projects, like I have here, Gemini projects, right? Let's going to create a new one. For example, I'll go name it OAuth client test. And we're going to create this. Okay, let's wait for the new projects being created. Okay, then select the projects. Now we are in the OAuth 2 client projects. Then let's create a new credentials. Okay, create credentials. OAuth client ID. So that's what we're going to create. So to create an OAuth client ID, you must first configure our consent screen. Okay, configure the OAuth consent screen. Okay, let's external the app name. So the app name will be shown here. Remember the consent space that Google asked you, right? So it will show the app name here. So email, my email, and authorized domains. I don't need that. Just keep it simple as possible. I'm going to copy this email and paste it here. Okay. Scope. So we have a lot of scope here. So basically, these email profile and open IDs, like open by default, they're still there. So let's keep it simple. As a user, okay, I'm going to test user this time. Just test user. Okay, and that's it. So once we done with the OAuth consent screen, let's back to the credential again, and then this time I'm going to create a credential. Application type web application. So this is actually the name of the application or to client Spring Boot app. Okay, so this is very important. So this is the redirect URI. You have to follow the documentation here. So the redirect URI, this one. This is where Google will redirect user from their login page to our application with the code, and we have to serve a request at this endpoint as well to get the code and exchange it to a token. Okay, but at the moment, let's follow the documentation here and copy this one. Here, HTTP, local HTTP, okay, login or to code Google. That's it, and create. Okay, one is success. Now we have a new OAuth 2 client created, and we have a client ID and a client secret. Then let's copy it and try it. Patient, back to here. Let's client ID and client secret. Okay, and then let's restart our application. Okay.
In this video, I'll show you the step-by-step process.
You will see the user consent
we need
page.
to figure out whether
this
they
is our app name, right?
work.
In the consent base setting.
This is what you right below that.
And then we're going to
checking if it's
here at the
the
Google
whole
domain.
flow one more time.
Okay. And
now this controller is really simple. It only has one job.
I would like to keep first
Send
log.
verification.
And then once I
goes
successfully
wrong.
log in, and by continue, Google will say your name, email, address, language reference. Continue. And then you see Google sign in consent page, and Google will redirect us to the page. Local code. Go here, right? So this is the redirect URL. Hello everyone, in this recipe we're going to secure a simple Spring Boot application with GitHub as the authentication provider by using Spring Security or up to login features. Okay, now we have the client ID and this is the line secret. Let's create and whether we are using the authorization code flow work without any interruption. Then we go to setting and the home page. This is the most important thing to make the authorization code flow work without any interruption, the callback URL. This URL is used to redirect user head back to our application. So let's follow the documentation here. So the default redirect URL temp is base URL login or up to application. edit configuration, and here we're going to enable environment variable. Environment equal to okay. Now the GitHub integration is ready. Let's create an API to call to this scope. It uses traditional authorization code flow. So in order to get the user info, we have to make another step using the set token to call the user info URI to get the information of the user. Okay, let's keep it short for this recipe and run it to make sure everything works fine. Okay, localhost 80 equal to this one. So 8080 because we're going to deploy our Spring Boot application in local, right? And the registration ID here will be the provider. Here is GitHub. Then click register provider. Here is GitHub. Then click register application. And now we're going to have the client ID. Then let's generate the client secret. Okay, now we have the client ID and this is the client secret. Let's create environment variable for storing them. Here we're going to back to application, edit configuration, and here we're going to enable environment variable. Environment variable, then we're going to have the GitHub client ID, right? What's that? Okay, GitHub client ID and GitHub client secret. So let GitHub client ID equal to this one. Okay, now the GitHub integration is ready. Let's create an API to call to. So I'm going to create a hello controller. Differences from the Google OpenID as a call to get the ID token. GitHub doesn't support OpenID scope. It uses traditional authorization code flow. So in order to get the user info, we have to make another step using the set token to call the user info URI to get the information of the user. Okay, let's keep it short for this recipe and run it to make sure everything works fine. Okay, localhost 8080. We've been redirected to GitHub. And if we take a look at the scope here, so we have the response type is called the client ID and our scope. There's only one scope, read user. No OpenID like we had in Google, right? That explains why we don't have the ID token. So it's not about we're not sending the ID token, it's about GitHub doesn't support the scope and ID token. So the default setting of the Spring doesn't include it. Okay, so I'll redirect URI here, localhost 8080 logging off to code GitHub. Okay, then let's authorize. It's asking for personal user data, read only, and we authorize. And here, so we have hello, all the information of the user. Alright, now let's add the Google client from the last video to fulfill our application. Here. And don't forget to provide the Google client ID and Google client secret. Connect. Simple edit configuration.
To do that,
environment is Google client ID and Google client secret. Some value, for example.
You can see the same thing here.
Then, okay, rerun the application. Now our application supports all login for both GitHub and Google account. Okay, now let's, for example, localhost 8080. Then we can choose GitHub or Google. Okay, GitHub and ban. Okay, that's pretty much just for this video. I hope you got something new out of it. Thank you so much for taking your time. Then, okay, rerun the application. Now our application supports all login for both GitHub and Google account. Okay, now let's, for example, localhost 8080. Then we can choose GitHub or Google. Okay, GitHub and ban. Okay, that's pretty much just for this video. I hope you got something new out of it. Thank you so much for taking. Hello everyone, you may have seen somewhere else that with simple configuration like this, Spring Boot starter or up to client dependency and providing the client ID and client secret of Google or GitHub in the application.yaml, we've already enabled or up to login in Spring Boot. It's extremely easy. But of course, it's not enough. If we want to turn our application with more complex use cases, we have to encounter in real life. So knowing what was running behind the scenes is never a bad idea. Alright, follow the Spring documentation. The OAuth 2 logging is implemented by using authorization code grant. So what's that? So basically the grant here is a flow of sequential steps to get managers. I like to get the ticket for that code, and because the apartment managers is the one who issue the code, so they know that okay, this code is valid and this code is for the resident X, then they return with a ticket. Hello everyone, in this recipe we're going to take a look at a complete configuration for setting up an auth to login feature with GitHub URI. Let's come to the token URI. So here, as same as the authorization URI, we need to provide some parameters, but hello everyone, you may have seen we've received a token rented. Here, let's say we have an apartment in our area. Each resident of the apartment has his or her own bicycle in its parking lot. So if we map to all of two terminologies, the resident here is the resource owner and his bicycle is the resource. Next, not anybody can go to the parking lot to take the bicycle. We have the security here to protect residents' bicycles, and he is, you guess, a resource server. So in order to take the bicycle, we'll need an allowance from the apartment manager. So if someone wants to take the bicycle, they have to get the ticket from the apartment managers and bring it to the security guard, and he will let you take the bicycle. So the apartment managers here is obviously the authorization server. On our side, we want to provide a business to residents of this apartment that bring their bicycle to their place. For example, if they're in a school and want to get their bicycle from the apartment parking slot. So our service is go to the security guys asking him to take the bicycle from the parking lot and bring it to them. Let's call it bicycle delivery service. And apparently it's a client. The flow resident really understand their actions. Advantage of this authorization code load for authentication. The login page, users will authenticate here, and now let's log in. After logging successfully, the authorization server, here is the Google Identity Server, will ask you for an agreement from a consent page. So this is the consent page that make sure you really want to share your role, or maybe they will have some some box for you to tick the role that you want to rent the client app. For example, here, do the resource owners really want to share their name, their email, their address to the Spring Boot or up to client, for example, and by clicking continue like a read, so you agree that use the privilege you rent here to get your resource in the resource server. Okay, continue. So, hello everyone, in this recipe we're going to take a look at a complete configuration for setting up an auth to login feature with GitHub. We know that the auth to login runs the authorization code rent underneath the hood, right? And that's the reason why it needs to follow the auth to standard as well. Let's take GitHub as an example. So first of all, when a resource owner comes to a client, in this case, resource owners is our users and clients is our Spring Boot application. Then our Spring Boot app want to know who the user is, so it triggers the auth to login features that runs the authorization code flow. First, redirect user to the GitHub Identity Server, which is in auth to term an authorization server by using the authorization URI. Here, user needs to validate himself or herself against GitHub and accept scopes in a consent page. When everything is successful, the user will be redirected back to our Spring Boot application with an authorization code by the redirect URI that we send together with the authorization URI. We will demo it in a little bit. At that time, our Spring Boot app will retrieve the code and exchange it with GitHub Identity Server for an access token by this token URI here. When having the token in place, our Spring Boot app can use this token to code to the corresponding APIs in GitHub API Server, the resource server. The resource itself is this API, for example. In this case, we need user information. The authorization URI, we will provide it with some required query parameters like response type, client ID, scope, state, redirect URI. As you may see in the documentation here, there's a query parameter we have to provide, right? Client ID, redirect URI, login, scope, state, allow sign-up, prompt. So you may not see the response type in the doc. So basically it's not effective here, but I'll keep it for all up to compliant because in all up to spec, this one. So response type is a required field and must be set to code, right? So that's why I have it here, so like response type code. So feel free to ignore it if you like. The client ID So if you don't know what is it, you may want to take a look at the video auto logging with GitHub compact configuration. So here I'm going to copy it from the application. Right. So I have it here, GitHub line ID. Then paste it here. For the scope, you can think of it as the roles in role-based access control in Spring Security. We restrict user to the corresponding data by his or her role. Here we need to retrieve user info data. So we need to access the user role file. Here, the user role file. This API. And in order to access this API, we need the user scope, right? So I take a look at the auth2 scope. Then in the user scope, we want to get the user role file data. So that's why we need the read user scope here. That's why let's copy it and paste here. State is an arbitrary string that when we send it to the authorization server and on the redirect UI back to our application, we receive the same state. To know that this redirect UI belongs to the authorization UI is the user section. The last one, redirect UI. And on the redirect UI back to our application, we receive the same state. To know that this redirect UI belongs to the authorization UI is the user section. The last one, redirect UI. This should be matched exactly with the one in the app registration process. So if you remember from the compact configuration video, it's the HTTP localhost 8080 logging off to code GitHub. We cannot code it directly in the Postman. So we're going to copy it and paste it in our browser. Now it's a communication between user and GitHub identity server to validate user and the consent on the scope rented. After everything is done, remember localhost 8080 login off to code GitHub, right? With scope and state. Since we're not running application, so we receive an error here, but it doesn't matter. We want to do it manually, right? String that when we send it, user info data. So we need to access the user, and in order to access this API, we need the user scope, right? So I take a look at the auth2 scope. Then in the user scope, we want to get the user role file data. So that's why we need the read user scope here. That's why let's copy it and paste here. State is an arbitrary string that when we send it to the authorization server and on the redirect UI back to our application, we receive the same state. To know that this redirect UI belongs to the authorization UI is the user section. The last one, redirect UI. This should be matched exactly with the one in the app registration process. So if you remember from the compact configuration video, it's the HTTP localhost 8080 logging off UI belongs to. Then the read state is an arbitrary string that when we send it to the authorization server and on the redirect UI back to our application, we receive the same state. To know that this redirect UI belongs to the authorization UI is the user section. The last one, redirect UI. This should be matched exactly and then the valid redirect or not by checking the state. So the state here is 123 ABC, and the state from the authorization UI receive an error here, but it doesn't matter. We want to do it manually, right? Now let's imagine we are the application, and from the application perspective, we need to check is it is the valid redirect or not by checking the state. So the state here is 123 ABC, and the state from the authorization UI receive an error here, but it doesn't matter. We want to do it manually, right? Now let's imagine we are the application, and from the application perspective, we need to check is it the valid redirect or not by checking the state. So the state here is 123 ABC, and the state here is 123 ABC, and the state from the authorization UI also state 123 ABC. So we know exactly that this redirect UI is for our authorization UI. Now we're able to get the code and exchange it for an access token by the token UI. Identity server to be localhost 8080 bit and paste it in our browser. Not code it directly in the Postman. So we got logging off to code GitHub. We cannot code it directly in the Postman. So we're going to copy it and paste it in our browser. To validate user, GitHub read off to code GitHub, right? We want to do it manually, right? Now let's imagine we are the application, and from the application perspective, we need to check is it the valid redirect or not by checking the state. So the state here is 123 ABC, And the state from the authorization URI is also state 123 ABC. So we know exactly that this redirect URI is for our authorization URI. Now we're able to get the code and exchange it for an access token by the token URI. Let's come to the token URI. So here we need the basic documentation as well, using the client ID and the client secret. Okay, let's back to our documentation. So for the token URI as well, right? We need the client ID, client secret, the code, the redirect URI. Here again, you might not see the RAM type. It again belongs to auth to standard. Feel free to don't care about it. So the code here is from the redirect URI. Let's paste it here. And the redirect URI, we might want to put it as same as the one in the authorization URI. Some authorization server want to check it. So in the authorization URI, we have this one, and let's get as same as the redirect UI in this one. Line ID, line secret, yeah, of course, it's the GitHub line ID and GitHub line secret. Let's copy it. Another thing is adding the header, accept, application JSON. So take a look at the documentation. So by default, the response is like a string, right? But if you add the accept header application JSON, it will return us a JSON. Okay, let's run it. Now we have an access token with a required scopes that allow us to call to get the authenticated user. Remember this API, api.github.com/user with a scope user, okay, scope user, and api.github.com/user. Then let's call it with bearer token. Here we're going to a bearer token, and the token is our access token. Let's copy the access token and paste it here. Okay, send. All right, it returns the user info. With this user info, our Spring Boot app can finalize the user login process, create a user section for the user, and bind the section ID to the user cookie. So the second time user accept, it won't re-trigger the flow anymore. Okay, now we know all the necessary information needed for setting the auth to log in with GitHub. It's not simply by providing only client ID and client secret as our compact configuration here. It's time to try the hard way. So in order to use an authorization server, we need to know where it is, right? Spring Boot used provider to provide this information. Provider. Let's call it my GitHub. So here are all the available configuration properties for a provider, but we don't need to provide both of them because we know the flow. We know which properties needed. Basically, we only need the authorization URI, the token URI, and the user info URI, right? So our flow here, authorization URI, token URI, then the user info URI. So this is our authorization UI here, token UI, and the user info UI. So this is where our GitHub identity server is. Another important thing is the username attribute. This is the attribute from the user info response that we want to be our username. This is our username. If you take a look at the hello controller here, that we want to be our username. This is our username. If you take a look at the hello controller here, right? So this is our user, and if you want to get name, so it will depend on the username attribute here. Usually we should choose some fields that are unique, like the subject, the email, or ID. For example, in this case, I know this ID is unique, right? And I will choose this one. So at the end, we will ring hello 11/0/11/60/89. So we extract the field to be our name. Okay. Now we need to create a registration that uses this provider. Let's call it complete GitHub provider. So my GitHub here. So it means that this registration will use the my GitHub provider. What else? So we now have the client IDs and line secret, of course. Line ID, okay, line ID, line secret. Like line IDs is used in both the authorization UI and the token UI, right? And client secrets is used in the token UI only. So that's why we need them. Line ID, client secret. Is there anything else? Before that, the scope here. We need the scope, right? So that's why we need them. Client ID, client secret. Is there anything else? Before that, the scope here. We need the scope, right? In the authorization. Read user. Scope. Redirect URI. Okay. We need the redirect URI. The state parameters itself is auto-generated by Spring. So we don't have to provide that. Client authentication method. This is by default the client authentication method. Client authentication method. So it's a client secret basic. So it means that we are going to use the basic authentication with client ID and client secret in the token here. So the basic authentication with client ID and client secret in the token here. So we're going to use the client ID and client secret as basic authentication in the token URI. So it means that. So if you don't specify it, this is the default one. What else? The authorization grant type. Authorization grant type here. Of course, we're going to use the authorization code grant, right? So let's copy this one. Okay, and the name. So let's call it complete GitHub client registration. Okay, that's beautiful. Let's run it. Okay, let's try to set it. Now we see the complete GitHub client registration, right? Click it. And then hello 11/0/11/60/89. That's what we expected, right? Okay, now put the breakpoint at the HTTP section security contact repository. Let's try to HTTP here, and let's try to put the breakpoint here. So this is where we receive the HTTP section and then get the user information. The HTTP section here, security contact repository. Let's try to HTTP here, and let's try to put the breakpoint here. So this is where we receive the HTTP section and then get the user information back. Okay. And now let's inspect element. Then we're going to the application, cookie and HTTP. Yeah. So we see now we have the section IDs from our Spring Boot app created for us, right? So basically, after we log in successfully, our Spring Boot app will going to create a section and link this section ID to the cookies for us. So for later access the API, we don't have to run the upload again. Okay, now let's try to test it. Basically, we would like to call our API again, right? Bam, and you see the section, our HTTP section is like B9AF, right? B9AF. So B9AF. So it's exactly the section, and based on this section, we get back our user. So we get back our user, right? Or to user from the complete GitHub. Okay, let's run through it. So we now no longer have to run the authorization code flow again. So it's like a basic login form. After you log in successfully, then we have a section for later set. Okay, let's try to remove this section and run it again. Okay. This time we will be asked to opt to login again. Reasonable, right? But one thing different. Remember that we just logged GitHub using GitHub username and password just a minute ago, right? So similar context. We get a section with GitHub. And this time we won't have to log in GitHub again. This will automatically redirect user with a code, and our application is exchanged with an access token, and the user URI is called. Let's try it. Then everything is processed behind the scene, and now. So continue here, it means that it just ran the auth to load and back to the original request. The original request is just here, right? So now I hope us understand that two sections related. After auth to login, as we mentioned in the earlier of this video, and our application is section cookie based, or we can say a browser based app. So never disable CSRF in this case. Now back to the application of YAML. You may want to ask, is section cookie based, or we can mention in the earlier of this video, and our application is section cookie based, or we can say a browser based app. So never disable CSRF in this case. Now back to the application of YAML. You may want to ask, why this compact configuration work? It's because there are some command providers are configured. So here you see Spring providers with some command provider like Google, GitHub, Facebook, and Upstart. So if you use one of these providers, we can use the compact configuration because the other characteristic, right, like the authorization URI, the token URI, user info URI, the scope, right, are auto configured for us. Open for URI, the scope, right, are auto configured for us. Okay, this video is long enough, but before we end this video, let's take a quick look at Postman. It supports a very convenient way to get the token. Here we make them 3 separate requests because I'd like to explain step by step to use the auth2 flow. But you can use the auth2 here to go to the our resource API. Instead of providing the bearer token, right, we can go to the auth2. And here we can provide this property as same as our Spring Boot app. For example, we name it the GitHub auth token, runtime authorization code, right? The runtime, the callback URI, runtime authorization code, the callback URI, here the redirect URI is the callback URI, the authorization URI, the authorization, the token, set token, line ID and line secret. Okay, line ID, line secret. Let me get it from here. Line ID, line secret, scope, scope, read user, state, for example, ABCD. Okay, basic authentication header. So this is a same as client secret basic. So basically using the basic authentication with client ID and client secret, and that's it. Okay. Then just press the get new asset token. Then you will be asked for logging using your GitHub credential, like username and password. Here I already logged in user the GitHub credential, that's why my section is there. So that's why I right away got the asset token. But maybe in your case you will have to type your username and password. Okay, so basically we have the asset token. Then we can use the token. So basically if you click use the token is copied to here. With that being said, you can just click send. And now we got the response. Alright, that's it. And now we got the response. Alright, that's pretty much just for this recipe. I hope you got something new out of it. Thank you so much for taking. Hello everyone, in this recipe we're going to take a look at the complete configuration for setting up an auth2 login feature with Google. We know that auth2 login runs the authorization code ran underneath the hood, right? And that's the reason why it needs to follow the auth2 standards as well. Let's take Google as an example this time. Since Google support ID Connect, so the flow now is a little different. If you have a chance to take a look at the last video in this series, a complete configuration with GitHub, you see GitHub doesn't support OpenID Connect, so we use the standard authorization code flow there. But this time, with OpenID Connect supported in Google Identity Server, we're gonna use the OpenID authorization code flow. So the difference in Google Identity Server, we're gonna use the OpenID authorization code flow. So the difference here in this flow for auth2 login feature is with Google, we no longer need the user info URI to get user information anymore. First, the resource server is redundant as well. Instead, in OpenID authorization code flow, when we receive the asset token, we also receive another token called ID token, which contains the user information of the user. So the flow is like this. First of all, when a resource owner comes to a client, in this case, resource owner is our user and client is our Spring Boot application. Then our Spring Boot app wants to know who the user is, so it triggers the auth2 login features that run the OpenID authorization code flow. First, redirect user to Google Identity. In auth2 terms, it's an authorization server by an URI called authorization URI. Here, user needs to validate himself or herself against Google and accept scopes in a consent page. When everything is successful, the user will be redirected back to our Spring Boot application with an authorization code by the redirect URI that we sent together with the authorization URI here, which we will see in a little bit. At that time, our Spring Boot app will retrieve the code, then exchange it with Google Identity Server for an asset token and ID token together by this token URI here. When having the ID token in place, the Spring Boot app now has the user information, but it still has a security risk here. The ID token may be changed during the response time due to the man-in-the-middle attack, for example. Our Spring Boot app, in this case, is the consumer. It consumes the ID token, so it needs to validate the ID token or verify the ID token. Our ID token, in this case, is GWT token, and in order to verify it, our Spring Boot app needs the public key of the authorization server, the Google Identity Server, by calling the GWK set URI here. Once our Spring Boot app has the public key, it can verify the ID token to ensure the integrity of data, make sure user data unchanged from the identity server, and use this data to establish a section for the user in our Spring Boot application. You might want to ask why we only validate the ID tokens. How about the access token? For access token, we are not the direct consumer of it. Our application just like forwards the token to the resource server. What the resource server? Where this resource server is the consumer, this server needs to check the validity of this access token by calling the authorization server to confirm or get a public key, like we just discussed, to not allow accessing resources. For example, if hackers change the access token here, or maybe the client app is actually a scam app that change the access token, at the end, none of them can use this fake token to access resources because that's change the asset hackers change the asset token here, or maybe the client app is actually a scam app that's change the asset token. At the end, none of them can use this fake token to access resources because the asset token is validated here, so it's useless if you validate the asset token at the client app. Another thing we would like to mention here is, if we notice in this journey, the user created two sections, one at Google Identity Server and one as our Spring Boot app server. Their separated sections belong to each system, and it's important to distinguish between these two. We'll demo them in a second as well. You now might ask, where do we find these URIs, authorization URI, token URIs, GW case URI? So they listed down here. The server flow. This is the authorization URI that redirects users to request their Google identity, and this is the token URI when users are redirected back to our Spring Boot app with an authorization code, and the app will exchange this code for an access token and ID token. In order to validate the ID token, we need GW case URI. That's not listed here, but in the discovery document URI. This URI also follows the OpenID standards. So we can find all the information about authorization URI, token URI, user info URI here, and especially this is the URI that we needed, GWK set URI. For more information, you can find this link. I'll put them in the video description below as usual. Okay, theory is enough. Let's move on to our Postman to experiment the server flow here. First off, the authorization URI. So in order to use it, we have to provide these parameters, follow the documentation like client ID, response type, scope, redirect URI, state, nonce. We can also have the login hint, HD, but since they are the Google specific params and they are optional, so Spring doesn't use them, and we'll also not use them as well. So if we take a look at the authentication UI here, you see require, redirect is required, scope required, state is strongly recommended, right? But for the other thing like accept time, the display, login hint, they are optional. So here we only provide the response type, which is code, client ID, scope, state, redirect UI, and nonce. The first 5 are for all up to standard, and the last one is in the OpenID Connect standard. The response type must be code. For our case, the client ID is our client ID in Google. Remember, client ID, Google client ID. So we're going to copy this and paste it here. Okay, for the scope, you can think of it as the role in role-based access control in Spring Security. We restrict user to the corresponding data by his or her roles. Here we need to retrieve user info data. So that's why we need to get the user info data. So the scope this time should be OpenID role file email. OpenID role file email. The next one is state. You can read about the state here, server float. It's used for preventing request forgery attacks. Just like CSRF token, possibly stay in an arbitrary string when we send it to the authorization server, and on the redirect UI back to our application, we'll receive the same state to know that this redirect UI belongs to the authorization UI in the user section. So state. Another one is redirect UI. Redirect UI should be matched exactly the one in the application registration process. So if you remembered in the opt to login with Google compact configuration, we set it between user and Google, right? So in a little. Okay, let's make it easy to observe. I'm going to change state to ABCD. Since we cannot code directly from Postman, we're gonna copy it and paste it in our method. Authentication to our and from. So we see the state ABCD app. It's exactly the state that we just sent. It is exchanged for an access to get the file decoded. Here I'm going to decode this one, copy this. And this is our token UI. Let's paste a new code here. So here is our token UI. As same as the authorization UI, we need to provide some parameters like rent type, code, redirect UI, the client ID, and client secret in the basic authentication. Okay, let's back to the documentation. Okay, here is the state checking. So when we receive the redirect UI, right? So we're going to checking the state from the redirect UI, and this is the state that we set when we send the authorization UI. So if they're not equal, then we're going to, send a invalid state parameters. So that is the step that we just did manually by checking the state, right? A, B, C, D, E, F. Here is all the params for token UI. Code, client ID, client secret, redirect URI, rent type. Rent type is the authorization code, right? So as same as us, except we are using client ID and client secret as in basic authentication, but here as the post parameters. So here they send client ID and client secret, same as code, redirect URI and rent type here as a post parameters, but we are sending client ID and client secret in the basic authentication. Okay. So because all of two standards support both of the weight, so Google also follow the standard. So that's why we can do it any way we want. In a little, we can see how to set this way in Spring. Okay, so runtime authorization code. The code is the one that we just copied. The redirect URI should be matched exactly with the one in the authorization URI here. And yeah, client ID, client secret here. Okay. And I just click send. Okay, now we have the access token and the ID token, which is pretty good. Access token is useless for our case. ID token is our purpose. User info is here, and it's a GWT token. Follow the Google documentation, we can believe that this token is valid since we take it directly from the Google Identity Server. And here is the user information that we can directly get from the ID token. So for our case, let's copy our ID token and paste it into the gwt.io. So here we'll see the same, but for our user. So basically our flow is done here with this user information. But Spring follows the standard and wants to validate it. As we can see here, signature verified. It's because the Google Identity Server is a well-known authorization server, so its key is understandable and embedded automatically in the gwt.io. So let's try to remove this key here and act like we don't know the key yet. So we'll see invalid signature. So now, how do we validate it? We have to find the Google public key for it by calling the gwkset URL. Okay, let's call it and find the key. Okay, let's take our header of the token. We'll see the key ID here is like D974, right? And then we have to find the key, match the key ID. Okay, this one. This key ID is 36. This is the D974. So this is the key that we're looking for. And then copy it and paste it here. And we'll see signature verified again. So now we can safely use the ID token to get the information without any worry. Another thing to notice here is Spring also validates the nonce claim in the ID token. So in this ID token we have the nonce claim here, nonce claim, like it's exactly the one that we sent in the authorization URI here. Right, same one. So finally, with this user information, our Spring Boot app can finalize the user login process. Here, create a user section for a user and bind the section ID to user cookie. So the second time user access, it won't trigger the flow anymore. Okay, now we know all the necessary information needed for setting or auto logging with Google. It's not simply by providing only client ID and client secret as our compact configuration here. It's time to try the hardware. So in order to use an authorization server, we need to know where is it, right? Spring Boot uses provider to provide this information. So let's call our provider is my Google. Here are all available configuration properties for a provider. But we don't need to provide both of them because we know the flow. We know which properties needed. Basically, we'll only need the authorization URI, the token URI. And this time we don't need the user info URI, right? We need the gwkset URI. Okay. This is our authorization URI. This is our token URI. And this is the gwkset URI. So this is where our Google Identity Server is. Another important thing is the username attribute. This is the attribute from the user info from the ID token that we want to be our username. So let's back to our important thing. The user info, both of them, because we here are all available. So let's call our provider is my Google. Here are all available configuration properties for a provider. But we don't need to provide both of them because we know the flow. We know which properties needed. basically we'll only need the authorization URI, the token URI. And this time we don't need the user info URI, right? We need the GWK set URI. Okay. This is our authorization URI. This is our token URI. And this is the GWK set URI. So this is where our Google Identity Server is. Another important thing is the username attribute. This is the attribute from the user info from the ID token that we want to be our username. So let's back to our controller. So here we're going to see our user.getName. So this name is username attribute that we pick here. Usually we should choose some fields that unique, like a sub, email, or ID. For example, here we choose a sub, right? So in our token, so sub in our ID token is 104556, right? So by choosing sub as the username attribute, so then here when we have the username, get the name here is going to say hello 104556, right? Something like that. This is the value of the sub claim. Okay, now we need to create a registration that use this provider. Let's call it complete Google. So the providers should be my Google. Google client ID, client secret, of course. Client IDs is used in both authorization, right? Authorization URI and the token URI here as a basic authentication. And the client secret is needed in the token as well, in the token URI. This one. So that's why we need the user ID in user and ID in client secret. So which here ID client secret scope, right? Scope in the authorization URI. Then we have open ID, profile, email. Which one do we need? Redirect URI. So the redirect URI we use in both author token, the token one and the authorization URI one. This one, redirect URI. Client authentication method. We know that Google supports both sending client ID and client secret as the basic authentication or a post parameters. So here is the attribute to configure. Let's take a look at the client authentication method. So here is the client secret basic, which means that we're going to send the client ID and subline secret as the basic authentication. And here is sending the client ID and client secret as a post parameters. So I'll choose basic at the session method. This one, in client ID and client secret as the basic authentication or a post parameters. So here is the attribute to configure. Let's take a look at the client authentication method. So here is the client secret basic, which means that we're going to send the client ID and subline secret as the basic authentication. And here is sending the client ID and client secret as a post parameters. So I'll choose basic at the same as we did in the postman. But feel free to choose the client secret post. So both of them work perfectly okay. Okay, authorization runtime. We are using the OpenID authorization code flow, right? But basically it's the authorization code flow with the OpenID in the scope. Authorization runtime. We have the authorization code brand code flow here. And last one, client name. Let's call it complete Google client registration. Okay, that's pretty much just. Let's run it. Okay, now try to access our Spring Boot app. We see complete Google client registration, right? Okay, to see the follow, let's log out Google first. I'm going to log out. Okay, log out. Then now complete Google client registration. We were redirected to logging at Google. Then redirected back to the application. The application will exchange the code for ID and access token and verify the token, then continue with our original request with the corresponding response, which is hello, and this is the subclaim in our ID token as the username. And now our section is created. Let's take a look at the inspect element, application, cookie, and here we'll see this is now our cookies created that have the section IDs linked to our Spring Boot application. So for later API calls, this section will be used instead of running the auth to load again. So don't disable CSRF for this browser-based service. Now back to the application.yaml, you might want to ask why this compact configuration works. It's because there are some command providers are configured for us at the command provider here, and Google is one of the 4 command providers that Spring Boot have us auto configured. So here we'll see client secret basic, the client authentication method, right? Client secret basic, and this is the default redirect one. Local hot 8080 login or up to code Google, right? So this is the default one. And the scope is open IDs, profile email. We have the authorization URI, the token URI, the GWK set URI. There are a lot of things reconfigured for it. So that's why our compact configuration work with only providing client ID and client secret. Okay, this pretty much just the video is already quite long here. Hello everyone, up until now we know that Spring ought to login to know is okay. Hello everyone, in today's video we're gonna take a look at how to add a new custom. Okay, another thing is username attribute. Hello everyone, in today's video we're gonna take a look at how to add a new custom parameter to our authorization request. As far as we know, the default Spring Auto configuration supports us only mandatory parameters like response type, client ID, stop, state, redirect URI for like the standard authorization code flow. For OpenID authorization code flow, Spring supports the nonce as the mandatory parameters for OpenID specification. And with Pixie, Spring also had to support the two cost challenge and cost challenge method here in the authorization request because they are the mandatory parameters as well. So Spring will support us with all the mandatory for the flow that we're running. But like tough, and especially when we work with the in-house authorization server, most of the time default parameters are not enough. For example, let's say the in-house authorization server requires a param named real in its authorization endpoint, and this realm is also validated by the authorization server to ensure the client can work on it. Here we simulate that behavior in our Spring authorization server with the realm validator class. This logic is pretty simple. We get the realm param in the authorization request, check null, and ensure the realm is accessible by the client ID. For example, our Pixie client can only work inside the realm of invoice teams, of the realms of order team, or the realm of product teams. For delivery team, it's not allowed. Okay, let's run our Spring authorization server. Note that Spring authorization servers is not our focus in this series. I won't explain it in detail to avoid distracting you, but feel free to take a look at the GitHub repo I put in the description below. Okay, now let's try to run our postman for the last video. So with that, we're going to copy this one, and so we'll see error, invalid realm. So in this case, to work with this in-house authorization server, we have to provide our realm, and that's what realm. And as we know that our stream can only work with we're going to use the Pixie client, right? Pixie client, and that's why we know that we can only work, like with the realm of the invoice team and the realm of the other team. For example, I will pick the invoice team here. Okay, so realm for the invoice teams, and then let's try to do it here. Now, username and password, sign in. And then it leads us to the consent page. Consent. And then we're now back to normal, right? We're successful and it's returned code, and then we can use this code to exchange for an access token. Okay, now how do we apply it to our Spring Auth client? Let's try to run our Spring Auth client without, configuring anything. Just keep the configuration from the last video with our in-house authorization server here. Here's. Okay, so let's run it. And we're going to inspect element. Let's try to access it here, and we're going to clear this one, my in-house authorization server. And you see invalid realm of to my company parameter is the error message that we set it up in our authorization server, but it means that we got an error. So this is our authorization request. And if we take a look at the payload, here we see we have the response type, client ID, scope, state, redirect URI, nonce, cost challenge, and cost challenge method without having the realm, right? So that's why we receive an error here. And then we have to provide this realm to make it work again. So how do we do that? So far, the properties file here, application.yaml is enough, right? We don't have to do anything. This is our application class, and this is our hello controller. We don't do any setting or any configuration here in our class. We only use the application.yaml so far, and it's enough so far, but this time we need a configuration class. The thing is that we don't want to override the default auto configuration. We'd like to keep it as it is and develop things onto it. So first off, we need to make sure that we don't accidentally override the default auto configuration. So we have to find the auto configured filter chain in the auto configuration class. Here's the auto configuration class is the all up to client auto configuration. All up to client auto configuration. And if we take a look at the all up to web security configuration, here we're going to see the default filter chain configured for us if you don't specify any bins of security filter chains. And we want to copy this filter chains. And let's copy it. And I'm going to create a configuration class. I will call it all up to configuration. Scene is the configuration class. Okay, now we are having our custom configuration class and still keep all the default properties functions Spring gave us. From now on, we can develop on this class and we can take control of the changes. So let's go ahead and provide an authorization request customizer. This is where we're gonna provide our realm parameter. Authorization request customizer. Thus we're going to return a consumer of to authorization request builder. And in this builder, we can add an additional parameters. And here we're going to add our realm with the value invoice realm. Okay. Next, to apply it to our service, we need to bind it to an all-up to authorization request resolver. And we will need an all-up to authorization request resolver. But in order to initialize it, we need to know how it is initialized by default, so we don't lose any functionality again, like we did with the security filter chain. We have to know the default, the reconfigured authorization request resolver that Spring provides us. So let's take a look at the all-up to authorization request redirect filter. Redirect filter here. So this class, all-up to authorization request redirect filters, and in here we're going to see that this filter is going to use our all-up to authorization request resolver, right? And this is the place that is going to, initialize the default, the authorization request resolver by using a new constructor on the default authorization request resolver. And then we would like to, keep the old functionality, right? Then we are going to copy it as well. For client registration repository, we can move it to the method parameters, and then we provide it later. So let's say client registration repository, client registration repository. How about the authorization request based URI? So let's see, authorization request based URI. This one from this constructor, and we're using this one. Okay, we're using the default authorization request based URI here. And then we're going to copy this one, paste it. Okay. And authorization request resolver. Then we're going to return this one as well. And in between, let's set the authorization request customizer. And then we're going to pass our customizer here. Okay, that's it. Now we already binded our customizer to a request customizer to the request resolver. And then it's time to bind the request resolver to our security filter chain here. So what we want to update, we want to develop on is the all-up to logging. Okay. So instead of using the default one, we now provide our customizer. Okay. All-up to authorization endpoint and authorization endpoint. And the endpoint is we're going to configure the authorization request resolver. Okay. Here. Request resolver, and here this is we put our request resolver here. Yeah, request resolver. And we have to provide a client registration repository. So we just auto-write to, we know this client registration repositories is provided for us as a bin in the auto configuration class, right? Take a look at the auto configuration here, and we take auto client registration repository configuration here. So by default, Spring have a client registration bin for us. It's a memory client registration repository, and that's why we can auto-write to our auto configuration. Okay, and then okay, we're using constructor injection. Okay, and then let's use this one, and that's it. So now we extended the auto configuration, the auto login part with the authorization endpoint, and in the authorization endpoint, we're going to change behavior of the request resolver here by provide our custom request resolver. And in our custom request resolver, we're going to add a request customizer where we're going to add a new realm parameters with the value in void realm to our application. So that's it. Let's try to rerun our application. Okay, and then now we're going to clear log and try to access our client app again, and now my in-house server. And you see, okay, we right away receive a response, and now we check the authorization URI. Here we see now we have a real invoice realm. Alright, well, that's pretty much for this video. I hope you got some. Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to customize our token request. So far we know that authorization called grant includes two requests, authorization request and a token request. In the last video we reviewed authorization request. Today we'll take a look at the token request, which comes from our client app to authorization server to exchange a code for an access token. Let's put a breakpoint to see the default token request that Spring supports us. So first we'll run our in-memory Spring authorization server. Okay, then back to our client app. So here we're going to put our breakpoint at the OIDC authorization code authentication provider. This is the class that's responsible for sending our token request. So here in authentication method, we'll see okay, the access token response, and we're going to get the response. Then let's go to this class and then put a breakpoint here. So basically, this class is going to delegate to the access token response client to send our token request to the authorization server. Okay, let's debug it. Okay, so now our client app is up and running. Let's try to access it. 127.0 to our application, our token response client, which is by default at the moment is the default authorization, right? The default. Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to customize our token request. So far we know that authorization called grant includes two requests, authorization request and a token request. In the last video we reviewed authorization request. Today we'll take a look at the token request, which comes from our client app to authorization server to exchange a code for an access token. Let's put a breakpoint to see the default token request that Spring supports us. So first we'll run our in-memory Spring authorization server. Okay, then back to our client app. So here we're going to put our breakpoint at the OIDC authorization code. This class is going to delegate to the access token response client to send our token request to the authorization server. Okay, let's debug it. Open server, right? And our token request to exchange a code for a access token. Code token response client, which is the default one from Spring in Spring Security 7. Additional header, for example, and an additional parameters for this request. Okay, so how do we do authorization code is we would like to customize, we would like to add an additional header, for example, and an additional parameters for this request. A very simple way. So get token response, which is from. Okay, that's it. The username, right? So we got something new out. A converter, which is a lambda version from the agent in the token request. We successfully send our custom headers and parameters. Crest line authorization called token response client. Now we can add more parameters, additional parameters and additional headers to our token request. Okay. And we go. It's the default. Okay, I'm at the agent. Okay, and request with simple configuration like this. Alright, well, that pretty much is for this video. I hope you. And it's third token response ID and code verify header, because this is going to
Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to take a look at how to add a new custom parameter to our authorization request. As far as we know, the default string auto configuration supports us only mandatory parameters like response type, client ID, stop, state, redirect URI for like the standard authorization cost flow.
Hello everyone, in
For
today's video
OpenID authorization cost flow, Spring support the nonce as the mandatory parameters for OpenID specification. And with Pixie, Spring also has
qua đây bên con suối con khe mà có biết quê hương Vân Kiều, diệt quân xâm lăng khắp núi khắp sông, gió rừng xanh núi lên nơi nơi. Con trống tre ta cắm với xung quanh buôn làng đàn súng sẵn sàng. Quân xâm lăng mi tới quê hương đây sẽ thành mồ chốn quân thù. Người Vân Kiều tâm lòng trong trắng như cánh hoa xinh đẹp giữa rừng, màu tóc ấy dung mà lòng không lay trong gian khổ. Vẫn lớn lên nhiều con băng cùng từ đất buôn làng giữa bầu trời xanh. Người ơi đây mình đất anh hùng bằng tiếng ca lừ giữa rừng xanh bao la. Đàn theo ta đi qua con suối con khe, qua nương giấy qua bao nhiêu rừng. Đàn theo ta đi đánh mỹ đêm ngày giữa rừng xanh xây muôn câu ca. Ai say sưa giết mỹ, ai ra đi giết nguy ở đất quê này. Khi đi qua có nhớ đây quê hương Vân Kiều dồn vang tiếng đàn. Tình 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 em dồn chân bước ra chiến trường, xuôi ngược khắp rừng, đàn súng trên vai vượt ngàn em đi trong gian khổ. Nào giá trị quyết bước trên đường, về phóng quê hương đô về tiền tuyến. Đàn ơi theo mỗi bước chân ta về tình quê hương.
Làn gió thơm hương đêm về quanh khu nhà tôi mới cất xong chiều qua. Tôi đứng trên tầng gác thật cao nhìn ra chân trời xa xa. Từ bao mái nhà đèn hoa sáng ngời, bầu trời thêm vào muôn vì sao sáng. Tôi ngắm bao gia đình lửa ấm tình yêu, nghe máu trong tim hòa niềm vui lâng lâng lời ca. Em ơi, anh còn đi xây nhiều nhà khắp nơi, nhiều tổ ấm sống vui tình lứa đôi. Lòng anh những thế càng thương nhớ em, dù xa nhau tròn ngày đêm, anh càng yêu em càng hăng say, xây cho nhà cao cao mãi. Ôi xinh đẹp tổ quốc của ta, anh lắng nghe bao lời ân ái những bài tình ca. Lòng nhớ thương quê hương miền Nam, anh hằng tha thiết ước mong ngày mai. Anh sẽ đi về khắp làng quê xây những ngôi nhà tương lai. Dòng sông mát xanh vòng quanh phố phường và nhiều công trường xây niềm vui mới. Khi bóng đêm lan về giữa cánh đè lên, em thấy như muôn ngàn vì sao theo trong đêm tối. Em ơi, tuy giờ đây đôi miền còn cách xa, niềm chia cắt thắt đầu lòng chúng ta, nhưng không thể xóa được hình bóng em. Dù xa nhau tròn ngày đêm, anh càng yêu em càng hăng say, xây cho nhà cao cao mãi. Ôi xinh đẹp tổ quốc của ta, anh lắng nghe bao lời ân ái những bài tình ca.
chờ anh tới, mà tàu anh đi vượt qua núi cao, trời quê hương trong xanh lời hát, biển quê hương du em bờ cát. Đưa chúng ta cùng đi giờ bắc về nam là thương nhau. Em bắt đầu cho tàu anh tới là yêu thôi, em thương rồi là yêu thôi, em thương là yêu nhau. Leo leo rửa mặt như mèo, sâu lắm chẳng được mẹ yêu. Khăn mặt đâu mà ngồi liếm láp, đau mắt rồi lại khóc meo meo. Leo leo rửa mặt như mèo, sâu lắm chẳng được mẹ yêu. Khăn mặt đâu mà ngồi liếm láp, đau mắt rồi lại khóc meo meo. Leo leo rửa mặt như mèo.
Năm anh em trên một chiếc xe tăng, năm bông hoa nở cùng một môi, như năm ngón tay trên một bàn tay, đã rung trần cả năm người như một. Năm anh em mỗi đứa một quê, đã lên xe ấy là cùng một hướng. Hôm nay lên là một giá dung phong, giữa quân thù đồng chỉ biết con liên thầu. Năm anh em ta năm cái tên, anh đi lên xe không còn tên riêng nữa. Trên ta sao một cái sao màu lửa, năm qua tim chúng như thầm lá tôn. Một con đường đất đỏ như son, một hồ rừng xanh bạt vàng đi vòng. Một ý chí bay ra đầu hòn số, một niềm tin biết thơ. Năm anh em trên một chiếc xe tăng, năm bông hoa nở cùng một môi, như năm ngón tay trên một bàn tay, đã rung trần cả năm người như một. Năm anh em mỗi đứa một quê, đã lên xe ấy là cùng một hướng.
gầm lá rôn, một con đường đất đỏ như son, một màu rừng xanh bạt ngàn hy vọng, một ý chí bay ra đầu ngọn số, một niềm tin quyết thắng. Lá rôn, một con đường đất đỏ như son, một màu rừng xanh bạt ngàn hy vọng, một ý chí bay ra đầu ngọn xuống, một niềm tin quyết thắng.
Gió thu về nhẹ bay lúa thu vàng, nắng thu vàng tỏa thơm mùi lúa, nắng thu vàng tỏa thơm màu lúa. Gió thu về nhẹ bay lúa thu. Đêm đêm hôm trước em ngủ em nằm mơ bay với pháo bông bay đêm hồi, mơ bay với pháo bông bay đêm hồi. Em trông thấy ở kia dưới chân núi sông miền Nam kia vẫn mong chờ Điện Biên mừng lúa, vẫn mong chờ Điện Biên mừng lúa. Núi sông miền Nam kia vẫn mong. Em mơ, em mơ, em hát em cười. Em mơ, em mơ, em lặng lặng nghe. Nhắn thu về miền Nam lúa thu mừng Điện Biên cười nắng, lúa thu mừng Điện Biên cười nắng. Nhắn thu về miền Nam lúa vui. Gió thu về nhẹ bay lúa thu vàng, nắng thu vàng tỏa thơm mùi lúa, nắng thu vàng tỏa thơm màu lúa. Gió thu về nhẹ bay lúa thu. Đêm đêm hôm trước em ngủ em nằm mơ bay với pháo bông bay đêm hồi, mơ bay với pháo bông bay đêm hồi. Em trông thấy ở kia dưới chân núi sông miền Nam kia vẫn mong chờ Điện Biên mừng lúa, vẫn mong chờ Điện Biên mừng lúa. Núi sông miền Nam kia vẫn mong. Em mơ, em mơ, em hát em cười. Em mơ, em mơ, em lặng lặng nghe. Nhắn thu về miền Nam lúa thu mừng Điện Biên cười nắng, lúa thu mừng Điện Biên cười nắng. Nhắn thu về miền Nam lúa vui.
Xe ta bon trên những dặm đường, giờ làng quê ta băng qua bao suối đeo đồi nương, mà xe ta bon ra chiến trường. Chào em cô gái lam hồng, theo tiếng bom gao đàn réo vẫn nghe vang vang câu hò trên đường. Niềm vui lớn tỏa lan thân quê ta, đi thông đường để những chuyến xe ta băng băng qua. Hồng Linh ơi, đỉnh cao mây vươn đã cùng em từ những đêm thức tròn, nối tiếp những mạch đường quê nhà, đường rộn ràng những chuyến xe qua. Tình nghĩa của em sáng tỏ như ánh trăng đêm rằm, tiền phương tay lái mang tình em đàm đang. Xe ta bon bon đi trên đường, lòng vui như mơ hồi, đường quê em êm đưa như thoi dễ hết bao tâm tình. Lững lờ đèn giặc dõi lửa soi để em đi thông đường, kia gà rừng bằng gáy cuối nương. Vượt đèo ngang nào bạn ơi, tay lái ta dồn lên lời ca. Hỡi cô gái trên đất lam hồng, mỗi dặm xe qua lòng em càng thấu tỏ. Dù xe anh chạy đêm chạy ngày, cùng chẳng bằng tình nghĩa em vì miền Nam mà yêu thương. Đi thông đường để những chuyến xe qua, hòa chung tay lái em đã góp công ngày đêm trên tuyến đường. Xe ta bon trên những dặm đường, giờ làng quê ta băng qua ba suối đeo đồi nương, mà xe ta bon ra chiến trường. Chào em cô gái lam hồng, giữa tiếng bom gao đàn réo vẫn nghe vang vang câu hò trên đường. Niềm vui lớn tỏa lan thân quê ta, đi thông đường để những chuyến xe ta băng băng qua. Hoành xuân một mái xuôi về, hòa tình em từ những viên đá nhỏ. Đêm đêm lát trên đường quê nhà, đường rộn ràng những chuyến xe qua. Tình nghĩa quê em sáng tỏ như ánh trăng đêm rằm, tiền phương tay lái mang tình em đàm đang. Xe ta bon bon đi trên đường, tiền phương đang vẫy gọi, hồi quê hương bao thân yêu cho ta gửi lời tâm tình. Chào những người chẳng tiếc máu xương, ngày đêm đi thông đường là nhiễu điều phù lấy giá hương. Đây tình Nam với nghĩa Bắc, thương nhau ta nào khó quản chi. Hỡi cô gái trên đất lam hồng, với bàn tay em rời non và lớp biển. Dù xe anh chạy đêm chạy ngày, cùng chẳng bằng tình nghĩa em bằng mình trong bao gian nan. Đi thông đường để những chuyến xe qua, dồn nhanh tay lái vô tiếng hát ca chào quê anh lam hồng. Ôi la la ôi la, ôi la la ôi la.
Đi dòng Việt chờ.